Okay, this is lesson 7, and it's going to be two versions of the words of Rebbe Lazar. And what Rebbe Lazar is doing is just saying, he's qualifying the case of hitiach tzleichise be'evan. If the bottle bangs a rock, that yechayev, in what case would that be? So the only thing that you have to know in order to understand this Gemara is a machlokes between Reb Nosson and the Rabbanon later on in the 5th perek. Reb Nosson holds that if one ox gores another ox, and the ox that got gored falls into a pit, dies, the Reb Nosson would hold that even if the goring ox is only a tam, which means that he would only have to pay half, the the owner of the ox that fell into the pit can collect the other half of the payment from the owner of the pit. So, which means what Reb Nosson's words was, what you can't collect from him, you can collect from him. In other words, they'll split the payment. So you'll get, in that case, you'll get half from the owner of the ox, the goring ox, the mazik, and the other half you'll get from the bal habar. And the Chacham argue, the Chacham say you can only collect from the mazik, you can't collect from the bal habar. Okay, so let's see what happens over here. It's very similar in our case, as we'll see. We're talking about a person that bangs his bottle against the rock. We're going to see if that's going to be considered like the pit that gets banged against, and can you collect from the owner of the rock, as we'll see. Amar Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar says, Leishanu, we did not learn. And we're talking about learning the seifa of the brisa that says if your bottle bangs against the rock, you're chayev. Because we did not learn this. Ella only. That was only said that you're going to be chayev when you bang against the rock. Sheniskal ba'evan. You stumbled. Stumbled on the rock, v'nashuf be'evan, and you banged against the rock. Also to bang, or to, yeah, something like that. To bang against the rock, that's good enough. Aval niskal bekarka, but if you stumbled on the ground, v'nashuf be'evan, and you banged against the rock, then you're going to be pater. Okay, that's what Rebbe Lazar says, which basically we can see that you're stumbling on the ground. That would be similar to, in the case that we said of Reb Nosson, the ox is goring another ox, so the ground would be the goring ox. The ground would be the mazik, and it's going to fall into a pit. The pit in this case would be the stone, and if that happens, that the ground causes you to fall onto the rock, so really the ground should be chayiv. The only problem is the ground belongs to the public. It's a public property. And the stone, which is private property, or it depends how we learn this actually. Rav held that it was private. It was lo yafkarino, and that's why you're chayiv. But whatever the case is, this would be considered like the pit, and the Chacham held that the owner of the pit doesn't have to pay. Reb Nosson held that the owner of the pit does have to pay. So according to Reb Nosson, even if you stumbled on the ground and you banged against the rock, you would still be chayiv. So the Gemara continues now, and it says, Kaman, who is this like? Who holds that if you stumble on the ground and bang against the rock, that the owner of the rock is pater? The like Reb Nosson, it does not go like Reb Nosson. Reb Nosson is the identity. If we want to speak about this machlokes, we call it the opinion of Reb Nosson, or the opinion that goes against Reb Nosson. He's like the title of this sugya. So it says this would go against Reb Nosson because Reb Nosson would have said that you're chayev, just like the owner of the pit would be chayev for whatever money the owner of the ox doesn't pay. So here the owner of the ground isn't paying anything because it's the public. So the owner of the rock should have to pay everything. But it says pater, so obviously it's not like Reb Nosson. Ikad Amri, there are those that say a different version of this. I put a number 2 to show you that it's slightly different. I also changed the color. I don't know if you can see that on your screen. Slight difference. Because it only is a slight difference. It's just exactly the opposite, as we'll see. Amar Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar says, Leitema. Do not say. Tema means to say. Beniskal be'evan v'nashuf be'evan hu demechayev. That the only, who doesn't mean only, but it means that is, we'll put in. That is, and this would be the dalet would be when. that if you stumbled on the rock and you banged against the rock, that is when you're chayiv. Don't say that. Don't say that it's only in that case. I should really put in only over there in parentheses, but I don't want to make it too. Let's see. Only in that case is when you're chayiv. Aval niskal bekarka v'nashif be'evin pater. But if you stumble on the ground and you bang against the rock, then you'd be pater. In other words, don't say like we just said in the first way. And we're saying that this is actually what Rebbe Lazar said. Rebbe Lazar said, don't say that the only time that you're going to be chayiv is if you stumbled on the rock. It must have been a big rock. And you banged against the rock itself. And that's when you're chayiv. But if you stumbled on the ground and you banged against the rock, you're going to be pater. Ela afilu niskal bekarka. Rather, even if you did stumble on the ground, v'nashuf be'evin, and you banged against the rock, you would still be chayiv. The owner of the rock. Why? Because he can't collect from the ground, but you could collect from the owner of the rock. In Kaman, who would that go like? The Gemara says, oh, that's great. That would fit perfectly with Reb Nassan. Okay. Basically, our question is, we have a Rebbe Lazar, we have a brisa that says Lefika chitiach tzachis be'evan. We have an Amira, which is Rebbe Lazar, which is normally Rebbe Lazar is Rebbe Lazar ben Padas, the student of Rabbi Yochanan. Yushalmi calls him Rebbe Lazar. That's just without the aleph. But and he's describing the specific situation that the brisa is talking about, and we have two ways of saying how he describes it. Which in the end, I'm not sure which way we're going to follow, but in the halacha that is. But we actually have two opposite ways of explaining it. Does it mean that he stumbled on the rock and banged on the rock, and that's why he's chayav? But if he would have stumbled on the ground and banged on the rock, he would be pater. That's the first way of learning. Or does it mean that even if he stumbled on the ground and banged on the rock, he would still be chayav? That's the second way of learning. So for us, it's kind of like in question, although there may be a rule that I'm not aware of whenever there's a nikah d'amri, which one we go like. I'm not sure of that. The interesting thing is that the Gemara doesn't talk about if you stumbled on the rock and banged on the ground. It's exactly the opposite case. That's a Taisvis that we'll leave for extra credit. Okay.